What would you do if you saw a man walking silently in the middle of the night, simple clothes, calm eyes, not a word? Some called him a vagabond. Some chased him away from the steps. But in the morning, an envelope appeared. Inside was only the words, "Don't judge others too soon." A low, slow, echoing voice. And then, everything you believe about people will change. Just one step can change your destiny. The city at night still does not sleep. On a small street in the suburbs, the yellow streetlights cast a shadow on the old brick pavement. A middle-aged man with brown hair, wearing a light gray shirt and an old coat, walked slowly through the silent rows of houses. No one knew that it was James Miller, chairman of the $1 trillion Our Victory Corporation. He often walked at night after work to think, breathe fresh air, and help people passing by a deserted park. James saw an elderly man trying to push a wheelchair that had sunk into a ditch. Without saying anything, James approached and gently helped to push the wheel onto the sidewalk. The man thanked him profusely, saying that he was visiting his son who had an accident in the hospital and that the wheelchair was the only way he could move every day. James just smiled. "I wish you peace," he said, then continued walking. The night wind was chilly. A few cars passed by, but no one paid any attention to the man who walked silently with a determined step. James stopped when he saw an abandoned bus stop. On the cold iron bench was a boy curled up sleeping, his knees hugged to his chest, his shirt torn thin. James took off his coat, gently covering the boy. He put a piece of paper in the boy's pocket that said, "Come to this address tomorrow morning. Someone will help you go back to school." It was an educational center sponsored by the James Foundation. He continued walking in the dim light of the street lamps. His face was calm, his eyes deep, carrying thoughts that no one understood. To him, this was normal, an evening like any other, but tonight, something different was waiting at the end of the road. James turned into a small alley where the streetlight barely reached. His footsteps echoed softly on the damp stone. A small noise sounded ahead. James stopped. On the steps of an old shop, a young woman sat slumped, her eyes red, her arms hugging her knees. She was neatly dressed, in a brown blazer and high heels, but her face was haggard. Maybe she had just been through something very bad. James approached, intending to ask, but when she looked up and saw him, a man dressed casually, a little dusty from hiking, she frowned. "Stay away from me." Her voice was cold. "I don't have any money. I'm tired. People like you always show up when I'm at my worst." James paused. His gaze didn't change. Only the wind blew his hair lightly over his forehead. "I just wanted to ask if you needed help." His voice was low and gentle. There was no judgment, no anger. The girl was silent for a few seconds, then shook her head. "No, I don't need anyone's pity." Then she turned away, as if to make him disappear. James nodded. He slowly backed away, placing a bottle of water and a package of cookies on the steps. Without saying anything more, he turned and walked away, behind him. The girl looked after him, her gaze still heavy. She didn't know who she had misjudged. The night was still deep. James continued on his way as if nothing had happened. In his pocket, a brown envelope still lay untouched. It would be mailed tomorrow morning. The next morning, the sun rose late. The early morning light still faint behind a thin layer of clouds. On the steps of the shop from last night, the girl was still sitting there, her head leaning on her tired arm. The water bottle and the package of cookies were half opened. She had not slept last night. Her heart was filled with guilt for the strange man she had chased away. Maybe he just really wanted to help, she muttered. The morning wind blew gently through her hair. Beside her, a brown envelope was neatly placed. The girl froze. The envelope had no sender's name. There was only a handwritten note on the front. Don't judge others too quickly. Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside was a small card, thick and smooth paper, with a light scent of cedar. The next line appeared in neat handwriting. Sometimes people look tired not because they are poor, but because they have traveled far to do good. Below, a carefully written address. It was the headquarters of the city's most famous charity. Next to it was a job interview invitation card. The girl was stunned. She had been to this center many times but had always been rejected. Now, the opportunity was right in her hands, by someone she had insulted. She looked up at the sky. Her face was red, not from the sun, but from shame. She hugged the envelope to her chest, her eyes blurred with tears. No one knew who she was, but surely someone believed she was worthy of starting over. On the other side of the city, James Miller was sitting in a small cafe, quietly watching the people passing by. He didn't need anyone to know what he had done. Just one person step forward. The girl stood in front of a large gray-white building. The brass sign glittered with the words, "Our Victory Foundation, for a Decent Life." It was the place written on the envelope. She held the interview invitation card tightly in her hand. Her heart filled with anxiety. Her shirt was ironed from last night. Her hair was tied up. Her face still looked tired, but her eyes were different. Stepping inside, she didn't know what was waiting for her. The large, quiet lobby. Natural light from the glass doors poured onto the polished stone floor. A receptionist smiled at her with warm eyes. "Hello, do you have an appointment?" The girl nodded, handing her the invitation card. The receptionist looked at the card. Her eyes slightly surprised, but didn't ask any more questions. "Please go to the 3rd floor. Someone is waiting for you." She slowly walked into the elevator. With each floor she passed, her heart beat faster. The hand still held the old envelope tightly. The 3rd floor opened to a simple space. There was only a tea table, a few wooden chairs, and a large window overlooking the street. On the other side of the room, the man from last night was waiting, still wearing a gray shirt, still with a calm gaze. But now the light shone in clearly. James Miller. The girl paused. Her feet seemed to be glued to the floor. Unbelievable. The person she had once chased away, once called a beggar, was President James Miller. James stood up, nodded slightly. "Hello, today is a new day." His voice had no resentment, only gentleness and trust. The girl bowed her head, her throat choked. I'm sorry." James shook his head, walked over and handed her a cup of tea. "No need. Sometimes people only see the truth when the light is soft enough to look deeply." She took the cup of tea, tears welling up in her eyes, not from shame, from gratitude, a chance, a forgiveness, and someone who walked through the night to deliver it to her. They sat across from each other in the room bathed in early morning sunlight. The girl still held her cup of tea in her hand, the misty steam covering her red eyes. James sat calmly, his gaze the same as last night, unjudgmental, undemanding. "Your name is," James began softly. "Emily," she answered softly. her voice as if she had just woken up from a strange dream. "Emily Carter." He nodded. "You've applied here 3 times. Emily was stunned. How did he know? We keep every application we've ever sent. Not to judge, but to remember who really tried. Emily looked down at her tea. I was hopeless. No home, no job, no one believed I could start over. James tilted his head. "Do you know why I walk at night?" Emily shook her head. James continued, slowly. "Because everyone is busy judging each other during the day. At night it's quieter. I see people more clearly when they're not trying to show off." The room was quiet. Only the ticking of the clock. The teacup in Emily's hand was still warm. So was her heart. "You don't have to apologize for what you said last night," James said. "But if you choose to stand up today, let your actions be your thanks." Emily looked at him, no longer holding back her tears. "Give me a chance. Just one." James smiled. "You've had it since you came back this morning." He stood up, holding out his hand to her. "Welcome to our victory, Emily." She took his hand, squeezing it tightly. A new journey began from where she thought it would end. The morning passed slowly with light footsteps. James and Emily left the Our Victory headquarters building, walking together on the paved path under the trees that were changing leaves. No one spoke, only the soft crunch of dry leaves underfoot and the early morning birds chirping overhead. Emily glanced at the man walking beside her. Still the same calm figure. Still the same messy hair as last night. Only today's light made him look warmer. "Do you always help people like this?" Emily asked, not hiding her curiosity. James nodded. "It's not because I'm great, it's because I was helped by others. When no one believed in me." The sentence made Emily pause. She never thought that a successful person like him would have a shaky start. James stopped by the park bench. Sitting down, he pulled out a small loaf of bread and split it in half, handing Emily half. She chuckled. "My first breakfast with the president of a billion-dollar corporation." James shrugged. "Bread is bread, whether you eat it on the sidewalk or in a restaurant." Emily ate each bite, feeling lighter than ever. She felt as if she had been washed, not by water, but by understanding and trust. The sun rose higher. The street corner where she had once pushed him away was now the starting point. James stood up first. "Let's go. There's a new skills class today, and I need a strong teaching assistant." Emily stood up to follow, without hesitation. Without hesitation. She was no longer alone. The morning wind filtered through the leaves, illuminating the clean stone pavement. Everything now had the soft yellow of a new day. Emily stood in front of the mirror in the small room of Our Victory Center. Her uniform was simple: white shirt, name tag pinned to her chest. She smiled. For the first time in months, she didn't feel out of place in the mirror. Outside in the hallway, James Miller was waiting. He didn't say much, just nodded slightly when he saw her. But there was something like pride in his eyes. "Anything special on today's schedule?" Emily asked as she and James walked down the stairs. "We're going to the old factory. There are some unemployed workers who need help, not money, faith." Emily nodded. Last night, she had learned the greatest lesson. Kindness doesn't have to be grand. It just has to be timely. The old bus took them to the western edge of the city. There, abandoned factories sat among makeshift apartments, children playing on cracked cement. James got off the bus first, carrying a basket of bread and a few sheets of paper. Emily followed, holding a survey form. She was no longer a job seeker, Today, she was part of someone else's healing journey. A man with no arm sat in the corner, his eyes sunken. A woman holding a child, her eyes dark, trembling as she accepted a loaf of bread. Emily didn't ask what they needed. She just sat down with them, writing each person's name on a piece of paper. Listening as if they were her whole family, James stood there, slightly back, watching, smiling. No need for the spotlight, no need for anyone to know who he was. He just needed to see someone he had helped, now helping others. In the middle of the rough concrete yard, the poor workers took turns receiving their bread and information cards. Emily sat with an old woman, helping her read each line. In the distance, James Miller, wearing a gray coat, was chatting with a young boy. The boy was thin, his cheeks dirty, but his eyes were bright as James showed him how to fold a paper airplane from an old newspaper. A young woman stood watching from a distance. Her shirt was frayed at the shoulders, her hair was tied low, and she was clutching a small cloth bag. She looked at James for a long time, then walked up to Emily and asked, "Who was that man?" Emily looked up. She hesitated for a few seconds, then just smiled. "Just a night walker." The woman frowned. "No. I saw him in some magazine. Was he the president?" Something Emily did not answer right away. She looked at James. He was sitting on the ground now, coloring on discarded cardboard with 2 children. No one would have guessed that the man had run multi-million-dollar meetings. No one would have seen behind the dusty shoes the man who had been called the golden brain of American finance. Emily spoke slowly. "You might have seen him in magazines. He might have been a chairman or something. But here, he was the only one sitting down at the level of the people who had nothing." The woman was silent. Her eyes softened. She turned away, as if she no longer wanted to know who he was, because the answer was there. No need for a business card, just the way he looked. A child ran past, holding a paper airplane, laughing loudly. James watched, his face glowing in the sunlight. Emily smiled slightly. In her ears, the words he once taught her echoed, "Don't judge people too soon. Don't ask too much about who they are. Ask, how were they there for you when you needed them most?" The sky was at its zenith. The sun was slanting through the cracks in the corrugated iron roof. The children had settled into their makeshift classrooms made from wooden planks and old plastic chairs. Emily and a group of volunteers were handing out more notebooks and pencils. The atmosphere was peaceful, as if nothing could disturb it. Until a voice spoke up, a little high-pitched and full of surprise. "Wait. You there?" Everyone turned around. A man in a silver-gray suit and glasses had just stepped out of a small car parked on the street. He was stunned when he saw James bending down to tie a child's shoelaces. James raised his head. His eyes met the man's. Calm, not confused, not surprised, just remembering. The man's name was Mark Levin, a mid-level manager in the real estate industry, 2 weeks ago, at an investment event. It was Mark who had mocked James. At that time, James was wearing ordinary clothes, standing outside the hall listening to the young people's presentations. Mark had laughed and said, "These days, you dress like that. Are you going to apply for a security guard job?" Now, Mark was standing in the middle of a poor area, witnessing the old security guard surrounded by respectful eyes and children calling out in affectionate voices, "Uncle James, help me draw." Mark awkwardly stepped forward. Are you really James Miller?" James nodded slightly. No pride, no mention of the past, just replied, "I'm just doing what I believe is right." Mark blushed. His eyes wavered between James, Emily, and the workers sitting nearby eating lunch. I'm sorry I didn't recognize you before." Mark's voice was hoarse. "At that time, James raised his hand, interrupting with a slight smile. "At that time, I didn't want to be recognized either." A sentence, enough to make Mark completely silent. In a moment, he understood there are people who don't need to be respected by their titles. They are respected by what they do. Emily stood by, silent, but in her heart, she felt like she was learning something else, that those who bow their heads and apologize might also be starting a new journey, just like she had done. The afternoon fell as lightly as a breath. The poor neighborhood gradually quieted down. Some people began to collect the remaining cardboard boxes, plastic chairs, and notebooks. Emily was stacking up the colored pencils when she heard a small cry behind the row of houses. She turned around. In the corner of a cracked brick wall, a woman was sitting huddled, her hands covering her face. No one was around. No one asked. Only sobs stuck in her throat. Emily walked over and sat down gently. No one asked right away. Just put a bottle of water down next to her. Then fell silent. After a while, the woman looked up. Her face was pale, her eyes puffy. "You guys are handing out food, right?" Emily nodded, softly. "And if anyone needs to listen, there is—" The woman tried to hold back her tears. "My name is Nora. My husband left a few months ago. My 2 children had to drop out of school. I used to be a seamstress, but now no one will hire me." The story fell apart. Like broken pieces of glass, gathered together by a warm hand. Emily didn't promise anything big. She just took a piece of paper and wrote a few lines. "Tomorrow, go to our Victory. They have a sewing class there, and there's free childcare." Nora held the paper with trembling hands. "Are you sure? They'll take someone like me." Emily took her hand. "You know, I asked the same question, and the first person who gave me a chance didn't ask who I was. They just looked to see if I still wanted to get up." The afternoon wind blew, carrying the smell of sunlight and dust. Nora burst into tears. It wasn't the same desperate cry as before. It was the cry of knowing he was no longer alone. In the distance, James was still sitting with the children, telling a small joke. But he turned around just in time, and their eyes met. James nodded slightly. Emily smiled. The afternoon was slowly falling. The pale yellow sunlight swept through the old tin roofs. The volunteers began packing up their equipment, preparing to leave. James stood under a tree, holding an old notebook. He was flipping through the pages with the names and backgrounds of everyone he had met that day. Emily stepped closer, her hands still stained with crayons from the children. "What are you doing?" James smiled slightly. "Preparing for a meeting." Emily was surprised. "Meeting." Here James nodded. No big room, no projector. "Just remember everyone you met." He turned a page. Name Nora, former job seamstress, wanted a new class, childcare, and faith. He wrote a few more lines, then handed them to Emily. "I'll help her move to the North Central area tomorrow. There's our Victory sewing workshop that's reopening." Emily looked at the paper. Just a few lines. "But it could change a life," James continued. "The boy's name is Hugo. He's talented at drawing. You could try sending his pictures to the art department to test." Emily sat down next to James, opening another notebook. "I have a list here, too. The one-armed man named Miles. I saw him fix kids' toys really well. He could probably be trained as an appliance repair technician." James looked up. His eyes sparkled in the evening light. "You're starting to think of him as a companion." Emily laughed. "Not because I'm good. It's because someone sat down with me, wrote down names, stories, like this." They were both silent for a few seconds. No need to say more, because they all understand helping people is not a single action, but a journey with many steps, many pages, many unforgettable eyes. The sun gradually disappeared behind the old houses. The last light of the day shone on the peeling walls, turning them into a golden glow like a silent mirror. Emily stood in front of the bus door, looking back at the poor neighborhood. Each resident waved goodbye. Their eyes no longer sad like this morning. A child held up a piece of paper with a drawing of an airplane flying across the sun. Below it was a scribbled line, "I will grow up to help others." James got on the bus last. He was still wearing a light gray shirt, but the shoulders of his shirt were stained with a few paint stains, a few dried mud stains, traces of a truly lived day. On the bus, Emily turned to ask softly, "Aren't you tired? All day long, walking, talking, taking notes, teaching drawing, bandaging, and even listening to other people's pain?" James smiled, "Not tired, because I know I'm on the right track." The bus rolled away, through each street, through the shops that began to light up, through the distant gazes of passers-by. When the car stopped at an intersection, James signaled the driver to open the door. He got out, without saying goodbye, leaving only one sentence for Emily, "I have a little more to walk." Emily watched, her eyes sparkling. His figure gradually disappeared into the darkness, blending into the anonymous crowd on the street. Some people passed by, avoiding him because they thought he was a vagrant. Some glanced at his shirt and turned away. But there was also a boy who picked up an envelope that had fallen on a stone bench. On it, a familiar line appeared, "Don't judge others too soon." The night wind returned. James continued walking. No need for anyone to know who he was, just someone, tomorrow, to move on thanks to a quiet kindness today.